Why do bad things happen to good people and why do good things happen to bad people? Usually it comes down to really something personal, which is why did my parents get divorced? Why did God allow that tragedy to occur? Why is this false lawsuit coming against me, bankrupted my company? And this happened to me. I don't feel like God cares.
Welcome to the Creation Today show, where we bring together interviews with experts and solid Bible teaching. Your host, Eric Hovind, affirms the ultimate authority of God's Word, the truth of creation, and why it matters to you.
We've all asked it at some point, whether watching the news, experiencing a personal tragedy, or witnessing the suffering of others. Here's the question we ask. Why does God allow injustice? It's one of the toughest questions people wrestle with. And the world isn't short on examples. From the pain of loss to the horrors of war, hearts cry out with that question. Where is God in all of this? I mean, if God is good and if he's all powerful, why doesn't he stop the injustice? Today, we're diving headfirst into this difficult question. And trust me, this is a conversation you don't want to miss. If you are new to the Creation Today show, welcome. I'm your host, Eric Hovind. We are on a mission to disciple the whole world, and we want to turn people's stumbling blocks that keep them from seeing Jesus as the creator and the redeemer of mankind into stepping stones on their journey to know the truth. And today, we're privileged to be doing that with you. So thank you guys so much for joining us. To my social media viewers out there, please hit the like and follow button. We would love to continue learning together and sharing this truth with you around the world. For those listening on the Creation Today podcast or tuning in via one of the many television stations, hello from sunny Florida. And it's actually raining today. So hello from rainy Florida today, but normally sunny Florida. Thank you guys for being part of today's Creation Today community. Now, if you're like us and you want to help disciple the world, one person at a time, let me encourage you to visit creationtoday.org/partner and see how we can do more together. Now, if you're ready, let's explore creation today. My guest for today's conversation on why does God permit injustice is a pastor. He's got the heart of a pastor. He has walked with many through the difficulties of this life, and like us, has experienced injustice personally as well. He serves as the lead pastor at Horizon Community Church in Cincinnati, Ohio. He is a powerful voice for biblical truth on cultural issues. Ladies and gentlemen, helping us explore how we can reconcile God's goodness with the brokenness we see all around us. Please help me welcome Pastor Chad. Hey, Chad, welcome back to the Creation Today show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
This is a difficult conversation. Is this something that comes up a lot in the people that you counsel and in your conversations and your messages?
Well, without a doubt. I mean, as a pastor, you're going having one-on-one conversations with people all the time, and that injustice takes so many forms. So sometimes it's the generic 30,000 view. How can I trust God when there's hurricanes in the world? Or why did those children were allowed to die? Or why I had a friend of mine who is a non-Christian, and he had suffered with cancer. He was down in Texas, one of the worst conditions of cancer. So he's in a special treatment center. Mostly, he was in his 30s, mostly with kids who were less than 10. He saw many of those kids die of cancer. Wow. He said, that's why I don't believe in God. It's because of what I saw firsthand. So sometimes it's very personal. Sometimes it's more theoretical. The hurricanes and the why does God allow injustice to, why do bad things happen to good people and why do good things happen to bad people idea. But usually it comes down to really something personal, which is why did my parents get divorced? Why did God allow that tragedy to occur? Why is this false lawsuit coming against me, bankrupted my company? And why would God let that happen if he's truly a loving God? So often it's kind of two levels to it. One is the level of the intellectual, theoretical one, which is sometimes a smokescreen for an emotional reason. I don't want to believe in God. But more often than not, the base level is, this happened to me, and I don't feel like God cares.
So as a pastor who's had to study both the Bible and understand what Scripture says and has to deal with real life, real world scenarios, is there any way to put these together? Is there hope for what God's word says and what we experience and what we feel? Is there a way to reconcile it and take us on that journey to do that?
Yeah, so there's a couple ways to do it. So one, sometimes when you're interacting with somebody who's been through problems, you're starting very personal, right? So I'm not giving a lot of intellectual answers as much as I'm being a comforter. I'm listening. I don't want to be Job's friends and pretend like I know why bad things are happening to you. So sometimes the best thing we can do is the sitting Shiva. We sit silently with people in the pool and we just weep with them and we comfort them. However, all of us have a framework by which that we think about suffering. And sometimes people have doctrine, right? Doctrine is a belief system, which is, I believe, it's my fault. It's my fault that this happened. The universe is out to get me. God's out to get me. God doesn't care about me. These are not just psychological thoughts. These are theological thoughts. So how do we understand who God is, what he's doing in your life in the midst of it? So sometimes, as you're carefully listening and comforting, you also want to share real thoughts. And like the first thing I always share, like when I'm at a funeral, I'll do a funeral with somebody young who's died. And almost every single time I do a funeral, I say the same thing, which is we're all gathered here today, whether you're a person of faith or not. We all share one thing in common. The world's not supposed to be this way. We're not supposed to lose sons and daughters. We're not supposed to lose children as parents. And if you've ever wondered, have you ever felt that something's wrong with the universe, you're already thinking like a Christian. Because where do we get the idea that the world shouldn't be this way? When you observe history, it certainly is always this way. It's always unjust. It's always unkind. It's always kick you in the teeth. But there's something in every human heart that is comparing this world with its injustice and its brokenness to some unseen, call it imaginary world, if you have a Christian worldview, but you're imagining how a good world would and should act. Well, that idea comes directly from the Bible. So if you're angered by injustice, if you're frustrated by the world being broken, you're already thinking like a Christian, because we currently live between two worlds. There once was a world that was perfect. We're currently living in a world that's imperfect, and we're moving toward a world that will be perfected. Well, that really helps you kind of frame yourself before we get to some answers to say Christianity helps you diagnose the problem. If you're angry, boy, you're thinking straight. You're thinking accurately that something's wrong with the world, be it the creation's out of sync. Romans 8, creation groans for Jesus to come back. Sometimes injustice is caused by what Christianity would call a broken creation. Sometimes I cause my own injustice because of my own bad decisions. Sometimes it's caused by somebody else, a drunk driver who hit me. Sometimes it's caused by creation itself being out of sync with its creator, hurricanes and tornadoes and things. And so I think before you get to the solution side, Christianity helps you diagnose the problem. If you're an atheist, your worldview is the world's always been this way. And Richard Dawkins says it classically in The God Delusion. Hey, DNA neither knows nor cares, and we dance to its music. And I would say, you know what? Come hold the hand of somebody in hospice. I'm going to go give communion this afternoon to somebody who's in hospice, who's dying. And try that worldview. Besides it being emotionally inept, you're not going to say that, but even intellectually. Hey, you know what? Richard Dawkins says, you're glad to have lived it all. In a world of blind chance, we're lucky to live it all. You know what? And that does not ring true with your heart. It does not ring true with your mind. And so I think humans are looking for something that accurately corresponds to reality. This helps me define the problem, and then we'll get to the solution.
What a powerful thought that you have to think like a Christian to even understand the very problem that we are projecting. So if we see evil and suffering, you're already well on your way. So to my skeptic friends out there, that's something you really got to think about. I mean, that comes down to the moral argument that, wow, without God, where would the morals come from? Where would the good and the bad come from? And that is such a foundational thought of who can even make sense of the very problem that we're stating. That's powerful.
Yeah, because I always say, the problem of evil is not a Christian problem. It's a human problem. And so there are different ways of thinking about it. So for example, if you're a Hindu, you would say there's a problem. It's called evil. And there's a solution. It's called karma. So if you want to know why you're suffering, it's because you did something wrong. And the universe is punishing you, either for this life or your previous life. So it's actually a very simplistic answer. And it's a very philosophical answer, which is, hey, the reason your kids died, the reason you are suffering is because you did something wrong. The answer is always suffering is your fault. Christianity utterly rejects this. Christianity, if you remember, the folks said one time to Jesus, they said, hey, this guy's born blind. Whose fault was it? Is it his or is it his parents? And Jesus says, neither. Get out of the doctrine of retribution. It was called in Job's day. Doctrine of karma is what we call it in this days. But it's an idea that injustice is always caused by what you do. God says, no, we live in a broken world. And the good news is God can work in the midst of that. And that's what he does, obviously, in that story. So that's the Hinduistic worldview, is that we go through the circles of life. I would say, not again, not again through the circle. If you're an atheist, what's your answer to the problem of evil? Not ever. Good people are never rewarded. Bad people are never taken to justice. Christianity says, not yet. Now, that is frustrating, which is why Christianity also gives you the room to be frustrated. We got books like Lamentations and Habakkuk, where you can say, God, I live in a broken world. I don't know why you haven't fixed it yet. And yet God doesn't watch from a distance. The message, too, is God came into that broken world. He knows what it's like to lose a cousin to injustice. He knows what it's like to see someone you care about beheaded for something that he didn't do wrong. He knows what it's like to see friends killed, or in a broken world, Lazarus, and to cry with us. And even when Jesus knows he's going to raise the guy from the dead, Lazarus, 4 days later, he still weeps with us. He meets us where we are. And then ultimately, he's a high priest that can sympathize with us because he has truly walked in our moccasins, so to speak. He's done that. And that's why he's such a great God, is though we don't understand the not yet, it's perfectly acceptable to be angry. If it wasn't, God would take like 20 books out of the Bible. But we can know that it solves not only the problem why we're angry, he's with us in the present, but also in the future, he is going to solve it. Just not yet, but it will be perfected. So what you long for, what you hope for, is actually equally psychologically healthy and biblically accurate.
I'm curious on the karma, and it was interesting the way you said it. What they used to call retribution theology, now we call it karma, is that seems to be something that's in a lot of Christian thinking. It seems like there's a lot of, you covered this in a series, by the way. If you guys don't listen to Chad's sermons, he's at horizoncc.com, and his sermons are really good. You did a sermon series on this, getting down to our foundational beliefs. It seems like there's a lot of Christians that have adopted other belief systems as part of Christianity, and karma seems like it's one of those very concepts. Can you address that real quick?
Yeah, that's definitely the case. In fact, I think most Christians think like karma about a lot of things. So we call ourselves a Christian, but it's one thing to be a Christian, meaning you've accepted Jesus into your life. It's nothing to think like a Christian. So part of growing and discipling yourself is learning how to take thoughts captive. Wow, where did I get that thought? Renew your mind, be transformed by the renewing of your mind, from Romans 12. So I do think a lot of that. So the whole book of Job is all about the doctrine of retribution. And the doctrine of retribution is what they're arguing against Job. Hey, Job, you did something wrong. No, I didn't. Your kids did something wrong. No, they didn't. So 38 chapters, or whatever it is, 30 something, 35 of them basically arguing doctrine of retribution. Then God shows up in a whirlwind and says, hey, you were wrong. Job was right. This was not caused by something he did. But I do think, a little piece, like I said, suffering is caused by a broken creation. So there is some small amount of time, right, where there's a reap-sow principle in the Bible. So the Bible does incorporate reap-sow. However, more often than not, I'm not reaping what I've sown. I'm just living in a broken world with death, disease, and other sinful people besides myself. I think the other thing that happens sometimes is you need to understand the basement beliefs that you have. One of the classic pictures of injustice is the Roman Colosseum. You think all the Christians and slaves and people who were powerless who got, beaten up or killed there or brutalized. So when I was there in 1990 as part of a mission trip I did for 2 months in high school, I got to see the Colosseum before they put the floor on. And I couldn't even picture how it looked because the floor was missing. So I returned there about 5 years ago for an anniversary, and they put the floor on. It's halfway. So now you can actually look into the basement. And it's pretty amazing because I'd heard about how they could flood that thing and do sea battles in there. I'd heard about the fact that Gladiator movies coming out, they're going to do that in the new one. I'd heard they had an elevator system for bringing different beasts up. And so you almost feel like, wow, you got at the base level everybody could see, but there's a whole massive labyrinth of rooms and elevators underneath. And that's what I call basement beliefs. And the basement beliefs are what people have that don't realize they have. And those basement beliefs can actually be things you've never tested. In fact, you can't test them, but you act like they're true all the time. And we all have these basement beliefs under our doubts and under our skepticism. And so part of what I try and help people do is figure out, how are you currently thinking? Where'd you pick that up? From school, from your parents, from wherever it was. And I'll give you a couple of them. One of mine. A lot of people think that science, for example, is the only gladiator for truth. The only way you can know stuff is with your five senses. Well, we think that because we've grown up in the last 100 years. But just know that everybody in the past before that did not hold to that view. I'll give you an example. The classic, very idea of thinking rationally came from Aristotle and Plato. And one of his examples is the cave analogy. He'll say, the example he gave, if not familiar with it, is he has a cave, and in the cave is a fire. And the fire, imagine someone dancing in front of the fire, and that fire casts a shadow. So he says, our world is like a shadow, meaning we can see certain things. Like, let's say you put a tree in front of that fire. You would say the reason we recognize something as a tree here is because there is such a thing as a tree in reality. I'll give you a more common one. Every person presumes there's such a thing as love, but love is totally intangible. You can't hold love. Oh yeah, I've seen somebody kiss. No, that's two pieces of lip touching each other. The minute you assign it to something more than what it is, touching of lips, you now say, no, I do believe and act like there's things that are true, like courage, like integrity, like love, like valor. Even science itself presumes rationality. Well, if you say the only things I can believe in are the five senses, then the things you're using to discern truth can't be validated by those five senses. You can't touch love, right? You can't put your hand around valor. You can't smell courage. But when somebody runs out of a building and rescues a kid, you don't say, hey, there's somebody running out of a building rescuing a kid. You say, man, that's what courage is like. That's what Aristotle would say. Yeah, there is truth of the five senses, but there's other ways to discern truth, like what's rational, that's invisible, what's consistent. What are those things that are true in the cave, the real things that we see shadows of? We know there's something called courage. We act like there's something called love. And we know there's something like even injustice. Can you put with your five senses, can you smell injustice? Can you taste justice? No, but you presume and act like it's true. In fact, somebody cuts C.S. Lewis's argument, you cut between me and line. I say, hey, you shouldn't do that. That's not fair. All that presumes that there are things that are true way beyond science, while at the same time we tell ourselves, I only believe in what science tells me. Well, no, you don't, because even science requires logic, the law of non-contradictions. So even science itself can't meet its own tests. So I think sometimes you realize, oh, I do believe there's a lot of things that are true beyond what I say. So how do I get to the basement beliefs of what do those basement beliefs tell me? Oh, there's such a thing as justice and love. And try telling your girlfriend or your wife, not I love you, but I have a lot of chemicals who are currently sparking, and that's why I'm having this sensation in my body towards you. Well, okay, that's what Richard Dawkins would say that would be technically accurate in his worldview, because he cannot see the transcendence. No, there is something called love and sacrifice and selflessness that is far more than just chemicals firing. Because if just thinking thoughts is chemicals firing, how could you ever trust something that is merely chemicals firing? How do you know those chemicals aren't lying to you? Even when we discern truth, we're presuming that there is something that is knowable, which is the very nature of science.
So what are the basement beliefs for somebody who has this problem of injustice? For somebody who's saying, hey, how can God allow injustice? What are our basement beliefs to be able to say that? You said one is you're already thinking like a Christian.
Yeah. Well, I tell you
what else is there?
Well, I think there's two things to think about. Number one is like, I wonder why we think we can distinguish between meaningful and meaningless suffering. Meaning, we think, I know for sure this is meaningless. And what actually wears us out, what we call unjust or unfair pain, is because we think it's meaningless. It's no purpose to it. So let's step out of the God equation for a second and say, are there areas of your life that you would say pain can be meaningful? Oh yeah, if you like to work out, no pain, no gain. Yeah, you say I'm training for a marathon, so I'm sacrificing certain things. I'm not eating certain things. I'm running, mile after mile after mile. My muscles ache. But you would say the pain I'm going through has a purpose. So you'd say it's worth it, right? That's kind of what you're saying. And when pain is meaningless, you're saying in the back of your mind, this is meaningless. This is worth less. This is not worth it. That's kind of the basement belief. But what if I told you that it was? I was talking to my son, Javen, the other day, and I said, buddy, you remember when he's a fantastic wakeboarder. I said, you remember the first time that I taught you to water ski? Yeah. And you remember how like fourth time in, you're like, Dad, I'm done. I'm sick of it. It's too hard. We've been out here all day. And I kept kind of nudging you. And you're like, at the time, you're like, crying. You're like, Dad, you're so mean. I can't believe you're making me do this. I said, and now you're 25. Do you love wakeboarding? Yeah. I said, what if you could get in a flux capacitor, get up to 88 miles an hour, 21.1 gigawatts, and go back to talk to yourself at age, whatever it was, 7. What would you tell yourself then that you know now? You would say, hey, it feels meaningless. It feels worthless. It feels like Dad might be mean to me, but man, it's going to be so worth it. And whether it's, taking piano lessons for all those years, we think we know when something's meaningless. And I think what Christianity offers is, number one, it's going to kind of nudge you, tap you on the shoulder and say, are you sure you can distinguish between meaningful and meaningless? And number two, it says, here's the great news about that perfected world. Not only do you get to heaven one day, but you get rewarded for every amount of suffering and difficulty now. What that means is that everything has inherently eternal meaning. So you thought it was just a little valuable. It's unexpressibly valuable. In fact, it says the sufferings of this present world are nothing compared to the glory to come. Now, I've never had a baby, but my wife has had 2. And I think most mothers would tell you labor and going through pregnancy is very, very difficult and very, very painful. But at the end, you'd say, oh, wish there was a better way. But man, I now have a new life that I love and I care about. And so it was worth the pain. So in the same way, Christianity uses the same metaphor, that this world can a lot be like labor pains or contractions, or the beginning of sorrows, or birth pangs are called. And yet it's leading to something, a delivery. And it says those glories are going to swallow up the pain. So if you're going through a very difficult time of pain, you're like, there's no way anything can be worth it. And God says, I can't fully express it to you right now, but what you're going to receive, the glory that's going to come forth, the reward I'm going to give you, 10, 20, 30, 100-fold reward, is going to swallow up the pain. I can't imagine. It's almost like when I used to go to Arby's. I haven't eaten Arby's in years, but they used to have this big Montana combo. This thing was monstrous. It's like the roast beef sandwich of doom. And you'd be like, oh, who in the world could eat that? And occasionally I'd be like, squish the thing down, trying to get all this roast beef in. By the time you're done, you're like, wow, I thought that. My kids was especially like, Dad, no one can eat that thing. And they'd see me chomp down this thing. And suddenly they went, wow, I thought the big Montana combo was monstrous. Now I know Dad's got a big mouth. And suddenly Dad went up because he could eat the big Montana combo. In one sense, imagine, as painful as whatever you're going through is, as difficult as what you're feeling is, how good must it be if it's going to shrink what feels so real and meaningless now? In fact, even in 1 Corinthians 15, where Paul says, for death is swallowed up in victory. So what happens when you swallow something up? Well, the thing that swallows it gets bigger, right? And the thing that's eaten, you realize it wasn't as big as you thought it was. Now, don't confuse that from saying, well, I guess all things aren't bad. Like, oh, because it worked out for good, it wasn't bad. No, Christianity rejects that too. Rape is always wrong. Murder is always wrong. So you can simultaneously judge evil with that objective standard of right and wrong. And at the same time, you can say, and God can work in and through this despite how painful and horrible it was. So Christianity gives you the freedom to not only know why you don't like the injustice, to condemn evil for what it is, and to have hope and meaning that God can work in the midst of it. Does that make sense?
That's really beautiful. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be people that push back against you can't have it both ways. You don't get to say that but that's the only thing that really logically makes sense, because otherwise you got to pick a side. And as soon as you pick the side that says it's bad, you're thinking like a Christian. And if you pick the side that says it is what it is, now you can't call it an injustice. You can't call it evil. Yeah. So you have to have both sides of that coin.
Well, and Christianity has a perspective on evil. For example, we take more of a scientific view of evil. So, for example, there's no such thing as cold. There's just an absence of heat. And so, at some point you can't get any colder because you can't extract any more heat. So for us, evil is the absence of God. We don't believe in the yin and the yang of the Hindus, which says that there's 2 equal force, or Darth Vader, the good side of the force. Luke, I am your father. We don't believe that there's 2 equal forces. One exists, heat, and one is the absence of heat. And so when you see bad things happening, you say, oh, it can't be a God. No, we just need some more heat over there. We got a lack of God over there. If the example of me saying, I don't believe in barbers because there's so many bad haircuts. You say, well, that's not true. Just because there's bad haircuts, that doesn't mean there's not a barber. This means they need a barber. And I'd say in the same way, intellectually, when you look at the problems of evil, you can say, all right, these are a lot of bad haircuts. And I don't understand why the barber hasn't forced haircuts on everybody, except maybe he's a gracious barber who wants you to come to your own conclusion that you need a haircut. And so Christianity allows you to distinguish that there's certainly problems. People look bad, and that's bad and that's terrible. But we need some heat over there. We need a barber over there kind of idea. And these are all basement beliefs that are underneath our general assumptions.
So if evil really is the absence of good, what is our hope in this world? What should I as a believer, what should my partners here as believers, what should those watching on social media that say, hey, I'm a Christian, I'm trusting in the truth of God, I don't want these basement beliefs that are wrong, I want to stick with what God's word says. What should we be doing in this world to help bring about more God, more good in this world?
I'd go back to what I said before, which is in Corinthians, it says, take every thought captive. I mean, I think most of us, our minds, myself included, by the way, our minds operate like a room with 100 doors, and we have left all those doors open. And so because of that, we've let every thought come in and build strongholds in our mind, whether it's lustful thoughts or that's karma type thoughts, where that's questioning God's goodness. If you think about the basic problem passed on from Adam and Eve is questioning the goodness of God. I know, isn't that what the devil said? Is God good? Not does he exist? A lot of people believe God exists, but they can't believe he's good. And so for many of us, we've let those thoughts stumble into our room, set up camp. And so part of what we do is we start learning how to close the doors and discern what we're allowed to bring in, what we're allowed to become a squatter in our mind. We've got a lot of squatter beliefs that have come in there. And then I start taking them captive, right? I take you captive. I hold that up to the light and say, is this God's belief, or is this my belief? Is this the Bible's belief, or is this like a pastor who said it was God's belief? I'm not sure it is. So I take it captive and then I replace it with a thought that is true. And so, for example, in my heat analogy, that's true, but Christianity is a very comprehensive way of dealing with evil. So there could be a medical way. For example, somebody might say, hey, I have a friend who's an alcoholic. He has a disease. Okay. Well, I do believe that when you do stuff wrong, it ends up affecting the brain chemistry of your mind. So it does end up having physical reactions to that act of will. But if something's just a disease, then you're not accountable to it, right? So if it's just a disease, then, well, my goodness, I'm not going to arrest somebody for drinking while or driving while having cancer, right? But they put somebody in danger. So the medical analysis doesn't quite catch everything that's wrong. Then there's a psychological one, which is, I just made a bunch of mistakes because my parents' problems or whatever it is. You're blaming your circumstance or situation. Well, that doesn't quite get it either. And yet other times you have, okay, well, there's some degree of will, right? So some degree of will relates to what I do. And then there's some degree of reality of the mind-body connection, because when I worry, I can get ulcers. The mind can be connected to the body in a way that's really observable. So I need to kind of acknowledge that these things that the Bible tell me are true are even true whether the Bible tells you or not. The Bible gives you specificity of things you can observe in yourself. Oh yeah, when I worry, it affects my body. So my mind and body are connected. But the Bible also says that evil is a power. That's kind of where my analogy breaks down, because though I do agree with what I said before, obviously, we also believe that evil is a power. And though when the angels fell away, when the devil fell away, they got colder, so to speak. They got out of God's presence. They are now a force of lack of heat. And so you might say, for example, I've heard this many times, man, I was having an affair for 6 months. I finally come to, and they'll say, I don't know what I was thinking. So saying, one, I did make a choice. And it does, even affairs, the chemistry on what happens when you have an affair or porn addiction for the same thing is actually very similar to what happens with cocaine. It literally changes the topography of your brain. And I think it's what Romans tells us: when God gives you over to wrongdoing, God says, all right, well, if that's what you want to keep choosing to do, I'm going to let you see the consequences of that. Well, as you go through that process, you go, man, it's like not just a choice I made, because now I want to unchoose it and I can't unchoose it. Now I find myself addicted to it or in bondage to it. And so that's why when you keep choosing something that's not God, you open yourself up to a power. There's a power over you. And that's why evil can be both a power and a choice. And Christianity offers a freedom to say, hey, in those times that injustice is caused by us reaping what we've sown, God can deliver you. He can deliver you from shame, from guilt. And the whole story of the Bible is about Exodus, how God delivers us from bondage in whatever form it is. And Jesus can't wait to do that. And so where you're feeling shame or guilt over whatever that addiction is, you can say, God, I just need your help. But for many of us, we have basement beliefs that say, unless I'm living a perfect life, God can't love me, or God doesn't want to work with me. And I can't tell anybody that I have a porn addiction, or I can't tell anybody that I drink way too much alcohol. And God's like, listen, I already know you're not fooling me. How about you just tell me that you need some more of my power in your life, and we'll infuse some heat over there, and let's start working on this together. And I just think God can't wait to wrap his arms around you and say, Mo, I'd love to see you more free.
That's powerful. I think that's exactly right. God cannot wait to see us more free. We don't live, we live in a period of grace. Now, do you distinguish Old Testament, New Testament, and go into if you, then you get blessing. If you do the wrong, you get cursing. Today we're under grace. How do you theologically handle that in when you're addressing the scripture specifically?
Yeah, so I know there's kind of a common mindset that the Old Testament was law and the New Testament was grace. I do not take that distinction. When I read the Bible, it's all filled with scoundrels the whole way through. So let's just start with Abraham. And we meet Abraham. He's told, go follow me to a promised land. Don't take anyone with you. First thing he does is he takes somebody with him. He disobeys. Next thing he does is he's so insecure, he lies about his wife twice to a Pharaoh. Next thing he does is he ends up having a baby out of wedlock. He's a polygamist now. Next thing he does is his first wife is jealous that he's got a new kid. And so what can I do with my maidservant? And Abraham says, you can treat her however you want. And the phrase used there is the same words used of the Egyptians beating the Jews.
Wow.
Father of our faith, Abraham, encouraging his wife to beat his baby mama, Hagar. And you're like, oh my goodness, these people are such narrow-minded, scoundrel, screwed up people. And I'm like, yep. And you know what the Bible's about? How God works with scoundrels like all of us. So I just see grace dripping off of everything. Now, I will say in the Deuteronomical law and the different promises, there are promises specifically to Israel. Some of those by generic universal principle apply to everybody. But a lot of things are Israel, the nation of Israel. If you do these things, there are certain benefits that come. But I would still say it's by grace. For example, Israel never got itself out of bondage. I think the entire Old Testament points back to the Passover, which is we couldn't get ourselves out of bondage. God did it for us. God provided the lamb. We did have to take the blood of the lamb and put over the door. I'd say it's where we as Christians today look back to the cross. I think they constantly looked back to the Passover and saying, man, God, thank you. You did for me what I couldn't do for myself. And I think the whole temple sacrifice system was like what you and I might call walking in the light, 1 John, which is it doesn't keep me in relationship with God. It's me saying, I want to walk in the light. Hey, God, confess. I couldn't get myself out of bondage. You did, but I've stumbled back into some bad paths. Here's my sacrificial offering. Here's my grain offering. Here's my salt offering. I want to thank you for your grace. I want to confess, which means to agree with you. I wasn't walking the right way, and I want to keep walking you, but you're my God. So I do see grace all the way through, and I do see a lot of those key passages related to Israel specifically. But I do think, again, that the sow reap principle can be consistent with what I talked about, which is, if you walk out in front of a car, there's a good chance you're going to get hurt. God did put us in a universe that also operates on a cause-effect relationship, and he tells us that, and he wants us to know how to prep for that. And even when you think about the broken world, God says, in this world, you will have trouble. Well, there's a basement belief, which is, I don't think I should have trouble. Peter tells us, do not be surprised by the fiery trial that comes upon you. I'm always surprised when the fiery trouble comes upon me. Like, that's not fair. I don't deserve that. So I have to, again, close the doors of my mind, stop letting those in, grab that one thought and go, you know what? Where did I get that? I don't think I deserve suffering. And yet, Jesus Christ, who I follow and love and pattern my life after, the only perfect man who ever lived, and he got brutalized. Somehow I've got myself in a category like Jesus didn't deserve this, but I really don't deserve this. Man, I need to realize that if the most perfect man, God in the flesh, walked on earth and he suffered, I should probably expect suffering. But through his suffering, he was seated at the right hand of God. And the Bible keeps coming back and saying, in the same way Jesus was rewarded for his suffering, you will be too. You think about Hebrews, Hebrews says, it calls Jesus the captain of our salvation. The captain of our salvation was made more perfect through suffering. Like as a Christian, I already believe he's perfect. He's God. How's Jesus become more perfect? It's kind of like a good movie. Like, how do you know? Let's take an old one, Rocky Balboa. You think Rocky Balboa is tough, and then you realize, oh wow, he's got to go up against Mr. T in the second movie. He's got the big Russian guy in number 4, and you actually find out just how tough they are because of what they go through. And with Jesus, he was already loving and forgiving, but you find out just how loving and tough he is when you put him on the cross. Like, oh, I can't believe he's forgiven the Romans. I can't believe that would come out of somebody like that. And so he becomes more perfect. It becomes more visible to everyone when you see how the main hero of every story and movie takes on the henchman of that movie. And I think the same way, God wants to do that in us. He's going to put some obstacles in our life. There's a classic example used in every time I teach through Peter. And because Peter talks about the preciousness of our faith is more valuable, right? It's valuable, it's worthful compared to the sufferings you go through. And there was an old illustration about how to keep cod from getting. There's a guy who's trying to deliver his cod around the United States, and he delivered them frozen. It kind of tasted like frozen fish. It wasn't good. So he started putting these big aquariums in an 18-wheeler and drive it around the whole country. But it just felt like it was a little mushy because they were just kind of sitting there floating for however many hours or days. So what they did for the cod is they dropped in a natural predator of the cod, which is a catfish. And the catfish kind of chased them around while they're in the aquarium, going from city to city. And when they arrived, the meat felt very fresh because they had this natural predator that was keeping them fresh. And sometimes it feels like God's dropped a catfish in your life. You're like, God, right, another catfish. Well, he's trying to prepare us for the world to come. And if you start realizing, okay, that's why it's worthwhile. It's caring. I don't like this catfish, but God is trying to do something in me that's even more valuable. Because those inner qualities, integrity, love, learning what to be sacrificial, learning how to choose what's right, are more valuable than the things I think are valuable. Comfort, ease, And so part of that taking thoughts captive is saying my whole ecosystem of what is valuable and what is less valuable is actually upside down. I need to reprioritize based on what God knows, not what I know.
So it really comes down to studying the Word of God and making sure that our basement beliefs are His beliefs.
Yeah, which is not easy to do. It's one thing to say it, do it, and go, oh my God. Because I would say all of us are probably carrying around 1,000 basement beliefs that are inaccurate all the time, which is why if Jesus wanted to get us to heaven, the minute we accept Christ, He'd take us to heaven. He's trying to get us to heaven, but before that, He's trying to get heaven into us. The kingdom of heaven is now. How do I, participate with Him in the process of sanctification, which is I need more heavenly beliefs, set my mind on heavenly things, not earthly things. And that's a process of growing as a Christian.
That's powerful. Wow. Hey, social media, I got to let you guys go. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. There's more to it. If you want to come over to creationtoday.org and listen to the rest of this conversation, Chad, you got to tell the story of the last Olympic not Olympic Games, but the last Gladiator Games. I heard you tell that story. You got to tell that story to us. Hey, if you want to join us for the rest of this conversation, come on over to creationtoday.org.